Picture this: a quiet lakeshore in what is now northern Kenya. It's 10,000 years ago. A group of hunter-gatherers, men, women, children, are going about their daily lives, gathering food, making tools, living in peace. Then the attackers come. By the time it's over, at least 27 people lie dead. Blunt force trauma to their heads, arrow wounds in their necks, some with their hands bound. A pregnant woman executed. A young man shot in the knee and then beaten to death while he couldn't run. This wasn't a random skirmish, this was a calculated massacre. And here's the question that haunts archaeologists to this day. Was this the norm? Did humans always kill each other? The answer will change how you see our species forever. Welcome back. Today we're going to confront one of the most uncomfortable questions in human history. Why did ancient societies wage war so frequently? And I'm not talking about the wars you read about in textbooks, Romans versus Carthaginians, or Napoleon marching across Europe. I'm talking about something much older, much darker. The wars that happened before writing even existed. We're going to look at the archaeological evidence, the theories, and the brutal truth about what it meant to be human in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Let's begin. For centuries, philosophers debated whether early humans lived in a peaceful state of nature or a violent war of all against all. Thomas Hobbes famously argued that life was nasty, brutish, and short. Jean-Jacques Rousseau countered that humans were peaceful until civilization corrupted us. But here's the problem. Neither of them had archaeology. Today, we do. And what the ground is telling us is complicated. Let's start with that Kenyan massacre I mentioned. In 2012, researchers discovered the remains at a site called Nataruk, 27 skeletons preserved in the sediments of an ancient lagoon. The injuries were unmistakable: crushed skulls, obsidian arrowheads embedded in bones, hands that had been tied. This wasn't a battle between armies, this was a systematic elimination of a rival group. But Nataruk isn't unique, not even close. In Jebel Sahaba, Sudan, a 13,000-year-old cemetery revealed 59 bodies, over 40% of them showing violent injuries, arrow wounds, blade cuts. Some individuals had been shot multiple times, suggesting they were attacked repeatedly over their lifetimes. In Germany, the Talheim death pit contained 34 bodies thrown into a mass grave 7,000 years ago. Men, women, children, entire families wiped out together. Many had been hit in the back of the head, as if executed. And then there's the evidence from the Abashevo culture in Russia, where mass graves suggest battles involving hundreds of warriors on each side. Prehistoric warfare on a scale we used to think didn't exist. So let's be clear. Violence was real. But why did it happen? This is where things get interesting, and where archaeologists and anthropologists still argue today. The most intuitive explanation is also one of the most supported by evidence. When resources are limited, groups compete. And when competition gets fierce, violence becomes a strategy. Research published in 2016 analyzed hundreds of hunter-gatherer societies and found a clear pattern. Groups living in resource-poor environments were significantly more likely to engage in lethal intergroup conflict, not because they were evil, but because they were desperate. Think about it. You're a hunter-gatherer band. There's a drought. The game animals you rely on are disappearing. The edible plants are dying. Your children are hungry. And then you learn that another group, a rival tribe, is camped near the last reliable water source. What do? For early humans, the answer was often, you eliminate the competition. The Nataruk massacre happened during a period of climate instability. Lakes were shrinking. Resources were becoming unpredictable. The attackers may have calculated that the lakeshore territory was worth killing for. But it wasn't just about immediate survival. Some researchers argue that warfare emerged as populations grew and groups needed to secure and defend territories. Here's the logic. Once a group claims a productive area, rich hunting grounds, reliable water, good foraging spots, they have something to lose. And they have something others want. The archaeological record shows that as humans became more sedentary and developed more complex social structures, evidence of warfare increased. The transition from nomadic bands to settled communities created something new: property worth fighting for. This is where evolutionary psychology enters the picture. Some researchers argue that intergroup violence served social functions beyond resource acquisition. Among many tribal societies documented by anthropologists, warfare was intimately tied to male status. Young men gained prestige, attracted mates, and solidified their position within the group by participating in raids and battles. In some societies, capturing women from rival groups was a primary objective of raids, leading some researchers to call early warfare a form of reproductive competition. This is uncomfortable to discuss, but the evidence suggests that in many prehistoric contexts, warfare wasn't just about survival. It was about status, power, and reproduction. Here's a factor that's often overlooked. Once violence starts, it tends to escalate. A group attacks your camp, kills your kin. What do? You retaliate, and then they retaliate, and suddenly you have a feud that spans generations. Anthropologists have documented this pattern in contemporary tribal societies. Cycles of revenge violence that can last for decades, with each attack justifying the next. In prehistoric societies without formal legal systems or centralized authority, there was no one to stop these cycles. Violence begat violence, and the archaeological record preserves the results. So what's the verdict? Were early humans constantly at war? The honest answer is, it depends on where and when you look. The evidence is clear that lethal intergroup violence existed long before civilization. The Nataruk massacre proves that 10,000 years ago, humans were capable of organized, brutal attacks on rival groups. And this is important, not all prehistoric societies show evidence of warfare. Some periods and regions show relatively little violence. Some hunter-gatherer groups appear to have been relatively peaceful. The pattern seems to be this: warfare intensity increased when resources became scarce, when populations grew, when groups became more sedentary, and when social hierarchies developed. In other words, warfare wasn't inevitable. It emerged under specific conditions. And here's something that might surprise you. The archaeological record suggests that prehistoric warfare, when it happened, was often more lethal per capita than modern warfare. Lawrence Keeley, in his influential book War Before Civilization, calculated that tribal societies experienced warfare death rates averaging 25% of adult males, compared to roughly 1% for major 20th century combatant nations. Think about that. In some prehistoric societies, 1 in 4 men died in conflict. So why did ancient tribes fight so often? The answer isn't simple. It was a combination of resource scarcity, territorial competition, social dynamics, and the brutal logic of retaliation. Violence was a strategy, sometimes rational, sometimes emotional, always devastating. But here's the most important point. Understanding this past doesn't mean accepting it as our future. Humans have always had the capacity for violence. But we also have the capacity for cooperation, for empathy, for building systems that reduce conflict. The fact that our ancestors fought doesn't mean we're doomed to fight forever. The archaeological record is a warning and an opportunity. It shows us what we were. It doesn't dictate what we become. And that perhaps is the most important lesson of all. Thanks for watching. If this deep dive into humanity's violent past taught you something, hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring the hidden corners of history. I want to hear from you. Do you think humans are naturally violent, or do we learn it? Is peace possible, or is conflict inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, the past is never as simple as we think.